All right, I'm with the American Eagle Gold team. AE is the symbol on the TSX venture. The company put out results yesterday morning, and several holes were, reported, including a pretty good hole. It actually beat my expectations. Hole 28 from the gold zone, 101 meters at 1.11% copper equivalent. I like all those ones from 47 meters downhole. So it's pretty close to surface. So the gold zone is taking shape and it growing in the south. And then we got the results of Charlie's hole, 24-24. Long and continuous copper gold hit totaling 906 meters, grading 0.36% copper equivalent right from surface. So it shows the continuity, the volume of rock, of potential ore, copper and gold throughout this system. It's pretty extensive. But my take, and the first question is going to be about hole 28. I say, like, my take was hole 28 beat my expectations. Hole 24 maybe met my expectations or slightly less in terms of the grade, but still a pretty impressive hole when you can drill 900 meters, like that. Not a lot of companies can. So I guess my first question is for Neil. Hole 28, what does that show you? And is that confirmation that the South Zone and the IP Embayment Zone is now a priority target area?
Well, I mean, the South Zone has always been a priority target area, right? And the bulk of the really strong mineralization was just below the more typical gold-bearing stockwork that we would see further to the north and to the west in the South Zone. The mineralization in 28 that returned the best grade was actually this, what looked like a really dark altered magnetic sedimentary breccia with really fine bornite mineralization all throughout, just lining the faintly visible classes and disseminated throughout everything. And that also carried a really strong gold signature. So it looked distinct from the South Zone mineralization, but being spatially like right there with it. And there's a lot of room to expand. That kind of collared at the southeastern edge of the historically defined South Zone and drilled a bit further to the east. Interestingly, as we got a bit deeper in 28, mineralization did start to pick up again. So it kind of dropped out after the immediate really high grade stuff closer to surface, and then it picked up to be quite strong. There was some really nice calco and a little bit of bornite disseminations right the way down deep until we got into that same really fine-grained distorted siltstone lithology that seemed to cut out a lot of the grade in hole 19. So there's a pretty big volume of rock in there as we get towards that embayment zone much further down to the southeast that we're pretty excited about. And we saw some similar looking stuff in hole 36, which was drilled further out to the east still, though still quite a ways from the embayment zone proper and out towards hole 9 there. So yeah, we're really excited. The South Zone, there's more room to expand in the immediate near surface in proximity to hole 28. Hole 36 was still a 150-meter step out. And then it also shows potential getting further to the south still of the porphyry stock as we step to the east.
Okay, and then it's interesting because I was looking at the core pictures from the holes, and it's really interesting because when you look at the core, and obviously this is not all of the core from the holes, so you're putting the choice stuff, and the most interesting stuff out, but some really good looking stuff in holes 24 and 25. And 25 was a little bit, on the underwhelming side in terms of grade. And then I go to 28 and it looks okay, but it's not like stand out. And that was the best hole that, you reported. So that gold at the top of the system, it's very fine. You cannot see it, with the naked eye. And it's kind of subtle, huh?
Yeah, I mean, hole 25 had some zones of pretty spectacular looking replacement style mineralization where it looks like we're inferring that some maybe more carbonate cemented lenses of sedimentary rock were affected by the porphyry mineralization and have almost this skarn-like skarn-like mineralization develop. We see garnets, we see epidote within it, but then we just see a lot of just dense bornite replacing the ground mass. Unfortunately, in the case of 25, that happens as it's sandwiched between dikes of the granodiorite as we approach the stock. So the bulk grade is a little bit lower, but there's still the potential for this really, really high grade to exist down there. And it's the same story in hole 24 as well. There's some really nice zones of very strong mineralization that make for some really nice detailed photos. Whereas hole 28 was just, like I mentioned earlier, it was really cryptic. It was really hard to see that mineralization. And if you didn't know what you were looking for and you didn't have a PXRF, it's very conceivable that it would be missed. So, yeah, it's, you know, why we do the detailed logging we do, because we were pretty excited from that hole, from looking at the XRF and then really like getting the core outside in the sunlight, seeing that really fine bornite.
Okay. And then just a follow-up to and then we'll go to Charlie and then to Tony. So hole 35 is a further step out to the southeast there. What are you seeing in that hole? And I mean, does that, you know, is it giving you confirmation that the IP embayment zone is a priority for the next program?
Yeah, so hole 36 was 36, I think
Oh,
you're
it's
referring to, which
36.
is,
Okay.
yeah, that was again another very interesting hole. Another example of somewhat more cryptic looking mineralization, still a very strong response in a lot of places in the PXRF. There's a lot more intrusive in that rock than we were seeing, and a different intrusive than we typically see. A lot of really dark looking diorite to finer grain mafic intrusive. That was variably mineralized as well. So it's a bit of a different beast geologically than the rest of the property, and it's likely indicative of what we're going to find as we continue to step south there. But again, this will stop short of the best IP signature in that zone, right? There's that embayment, that enclave of lower IP that bears a shoulder signature similar to where we see elsewhere around the porphyry stock. Um, it's it's still stepping a bit further to the east and a bit further to the south. But yeah, that's hole 36 was a really interesting hole. There was still definitely, you know, it's definitely within the system. There's still some pretty good visual chalcopyrite and bornite mineralization within it. But again, it doesn't jump out at you as much as it does in the higher grade zones within, like, you know, our main zone, 25, 22, some of the really nice stuff deeper down there.
By the way, a friend of mine who's been a little bit of a skeptic on AE shared something, you know, with me that Tech did a large magnetic survey in this area of Canada in the mid 90s, a very large survey. And that may have been a part of why they took a stake in the company. Do you have, you know, that mag survey that they did?
Um, we don't have access to the larger regional survey, though that's probably being integrated and superseded by the larger provincial survey over that area. But we do have detailed magnetic surveying of the property. We flew in at the beginning of 2023. And it shows a very large circular magnetic anomaly, one of the biggest in the region.
Yeah, you know, like, you know, across the whole property or in the south there?
No, across the whole property. So
Okay.
yeah, property-wide survey. The magnetic signature kind of bleeds over into everything. That the porphyry stock itself is quite magnetic, as well as the alteration associated with the porphyry emplacement.
Okay. And now we'll go to Charlie, hole 24. So, you know, this was your hole. You're super excited about this. Were you happy, you know, with the results?
Yeah, you know, I mean, to give a little bit of context, Robert, you know, it was one of the holes that we drilled kind of out from the south zone, the gold zone, in various directions. And, you know, I wasn't right there, but kind of kept it running. We didn't plan it to go that far north, but it was just like, hey, we can't shut this thing down because the visuals and the portable XRF are good enough to kind of keep it going. Like, let's just run it along. You know, and when you look at the historical data, it's the South Zone, the North Zone. They're separate systems historically. And you know, I mean, I guess my thesis all the way along is like, hey, what brought us into this whole program was that there was a coincident mag and an IP chargeability high that ran up the western side of the stock that also had a ZTEM signature. And that's why we were brought in to kind of to work on this project, why American Eagle was brought in by the underlying, rights holders that had taken over on this. And so, it's like, I think there's min all the way up and down there. And as it stands, there wasn't really the density of drilling. Obviously, everything was shallow, and we didn't have, amazing luck in there on the first pass in 2022, but I still believed in that. And I think now, it shows it as a bit thinner in there, and may in fact that may in fact be the case because there's sort of maybe two different systems, one in the north and one in the south, with slightly different ages, perhaps. You haven't fully proven that. But I think that center part will fill in. And why it looks a bit thinner is just because there's less drilling there, and we know there's some variation within the system. And I think if you fill in with more drilling, that's going to look better and better over time.
Okay, I'll go to Tony now, and then back to Neil. So Tony, I mean, it's pretty clear the company is focusing on the north. A lot of the recent conversations that you guys have done have focused really on the north and these step out holes that are pending in the north. How important is it for you to set expectations for what's to come?
Yeah, look, it's important. I think look, we wouldn't be touting the north unless we were confident in it. I think that we have a bit of a tiger by the tail here. But you want people to be primed for us. So when the results come out, we're not jumping off a 50-cent range, or we're jumping off a 70, 80-cent range. It's my job to talk about, the holes I think we're going to be good, and, increase shareholder value. And, I think we will be able to prove it. But again, it's all in the assays. So again, cautiously optimistic, forward-looking statements. You can always be surprised one way or the other, but it's not like we saw a 20-meter stretch here. It's boxes upon boxes upon boxes of very nice core in it, which I'm sure Neil's gonna eventually show in this interview. But yeah, look, you got to set expectations on the downside and the upside. But I'm very excited about what's coming up in the north. This is Act 2, Scene 1.
Okay. Yeah, so you guys have some new graphics in yesterday's news that I really liked, including the 3D section showing the volume of the copper north zone. It's quite large, and it's still open a few different ways, including to the north. So Neil, can you tell us about the last 3 or 4 holes of the program and sort of what the objective was there?
Yeah. I think earlier on, especially from the results of 2022, people had kind of placed limits on the extent of the mineralization at our hole 5, which is a vertical hole and was probably the weakest hole of the 2022 program. We didn't really think that was where it ended. We were still seeing mineralization completely within it. There was the odd interval of nicely mineralized intrusive rock. There was still some coarse bornite veining. There is still some disseminations through the conglomerate. So we kind of knew that we were in a good zone there. If you look at the sulfide speciation, especially getting deeper, it seemed to indicate that our better higher grade sulfides, our bornite and our chalcocite, were increasing in abundance to depth to the northeast. So the first hole really testing the north was, well, I guess there was 2. So we had hole 33, which was at the north end of our west to east drilling expansion, our systematic drilling testing from the south to the north. That hole hit some really interesting mineralization. There was quite dense, more typical mineralization we see off the main zone of just bornite, chalcopyrite disseminations, and class replacement within the conglomerate and veining. And then we hit this really, really extensive zone of chalcedonic Chalcedonic veining, Chalcedonic stockwork veining with some intervals of hydrothermal breccia that carried a bit of a different mineral assemblage than we typically see. So there were a bit more sulfosalts. There was a lot more pathfinder elements coming up, antimony, mercury, arsenic, not in crazy high levels, but at least enough to register in the XRF, which is, those are pretty good precious metals pathfinders. And texturally, it was just really unique. So, and then it was cut again, or looked like it was perhaps cutting. It was breaking up and distorting Bornite and chalcocite veining. So there's a pretty extensive interval of this, which we were pretty encouraged by. And then our next hole, hole 35, we drilled from the hole 5 collar location and oriented to the northeast at a -65. So we were covering quite a bit of ground and drilling northeast. And we hit a very extensive interval, couple extensive intervals of a different intrusive that looks like it's later stage in the main porphyry stock and hosting dark-rimmed, fine disseminations of bornite, what looks now to be chalcocite and chalcopyrite, depending on where you are in this intrusion. And so that's it was a very, very intriguing rock to see and very, very well mineralized. So it kind of is it's another unique thing at NAC. We hadn't hit rock that looked like this before. We'd hit some intervals of mineralization that looked similar and some of the more monzonitic diking to the south, but texturally it was still quite different. And in our immobile element, titanium zirconium, it has a different signature. So it's a separate phase of intrusive that has a somewhat unique style of mineralization, and we've hit it quite extensively. Yeah, so Tony's got some photos up there, NAC 2435, NAC 2433, an example of the brecciation and chalcedonic veining, which is really interesting. And then this paler, more felsic looking intrusive with quite a bit of disseminated bornite and chalcopyrite in it. Yeah, and so we hit several hundred meters of this rock in 35 and 38 the whole finish of the season. So we're cautiously optimistic about it, right? We don't know until assays. It's really hard to get an accurate reading from the XRF because we try to hit ground mass. We don't want to hit the disseminations dead on, and the disseminations are quite small. And we don't know what the precious metals are going to return in. But visually, very, very encouraging.
So based upon what you know about the project and basically being focused on this nonstop for the last couple of years, you probably know it better than anyone. It's in the north zone. I mean, these holes 33, 35, they're in the north zone, which is more copper abundant. But are you thinking that this is a totally separate phase that may actually have gold in it as well?
Well, so the shallow north zone, which was defined historically, is quite gold poor and copper rich. But the historical drilling stopped below about 300 meters. And at about 350 meters in the north zone, mineralization picks up again and the gold grade picks up again. And it's actually a much more similar signature to the south zone than the shallow north zone is. So because all of this mineralization we encountered is quite deep, or at least extends quite deep, it's possible that it's part of the same event, or at least something analogous, the same process, but at a different location, associated with the same pulse of magnetism that's bringing in the hydrothermal fluids. So it's a little bit too early to say, but we do know from our deeper results in the north zone that the gold does pick up.
Okay. And then two more holes, 37 and 38 were also drilled, with 38 being the furthest north hole. So, I mean, holes 35 and 38, they stand to really expand this to the north quite substantially, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, there is very little drilling out there. There's a few old Noranda holes that were less than 100 meters, basically just testing the top 50 meters below till. and very widely spaced, a couple 400-meter vertical holes out there. There is no drilling out there from the 1995, 1996 drilling. So it's really, really open. And the fact that we've hit this mineralization within the porphyry stock, like we know it intrudes the porphyry stock, we know it's later phase, that really opens up that entire body to more systematic exploration. Our initial focus this year, because we didn't have any really solid confirmation that the porphyry stock hosted larger bodies of mineralized rock until now, was focused on systematically exploring what we knew to be the best mineralization marginal of the porphyry stock. Now we have some confirmation that there is some pretty sizable intervals of pretty nice mineralization hosted within the porphyry stock. It's going to change up the approach on how we go about the systematic exploration next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's what stands out to me. You know, when I look at the plan map showing the holes in the north, it's like you got into the porphyry stock a little bit in hole 2433. You obviously liked what you saw, and then you tested it again in 35 and 37 and 38. You went deeper, deeper, deeper into the porphyry stock and to the north. And that's where you finished this phase of drilling. As somebody who's seen a lot of drill programs, that's encouraging to me, because you guys know what you're doing. These holes cost a lot of money. It says to me you're onto something. You're onto something new and potentially higher grade. The word hypogene, enrichment came up in your conversation with Nate Smith, that I watched last night. Tell us about that and what it can mean.
I mean, it's somewhat unusual, and I'm not like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be speaking out of turn here, speaking to something which I'm not an expert on. The reason it looks potentially maybe enriched is because there are rims of chalcocite around the Bornite, which shows that there's maybe something later that's interacting with the previously deposited sulfides, whether they started as chalcopyrite and then were changed to Bornite and then chalcocite. It's unclear. There is a bit of a sericitic overprint. So a lot of this rock is very pale, very soft. The phenocrysts are not a primary feldspar at this point anymore. They have been altered. So there is this was deposited, and then there was some possibly in situ alteration, because the hosting rock, the hosting granodiorite, actually isn't all that altered, but we have some pretty conclusive cross-cutting relationships that show that this more altered phase of mineralized intrusive is cutting the stock. So there's a pretty complex relationship between the emplacement of this, the alteration, the deposition of the mineralization, and then the actual sulfide speciation that we do see. And it kind of varies throughout the package. So it'll go from Bornite chalcocite, pretty abruptly into chalcopyrite as the main dissemination, and then pretty abruptly back into Bornite and chalcocite. So it does look like there's some definitely more local variation happening, but it's going to take a bit of work and a bit of academic work in the off season for sure, to properly characterize this. Some petrographic studies, some focused hyperspectral look at these intrusives, and really bringing this together in a geological model as well, because we do have a lot, like I said, we have a lot of information about the timing and the relationships between these. So yeah, it's going to take a bit more study to properly nail this down.
Yeah, you got a lot of new information, and you're going to get a lot more data to assess in the next few months. Yes. Charlie, there was this post on Twitter that the company posted. I guess it was in August, or maybe it was last month. I don't know, but it was in the last couple of months, and it showed you at the core shack, and you guys are staring at core. What hole was that, and what got you out of bed to go to the core shack to see this core?
I can't recall the thing. I'm not really a frequent Instagram
I think that was hole
user, but
33, Charlie.
yeah,
Hole
okay.
33.
Well, I guess, yeah, you just showed the picture with Emily in it, with just that forest of core that was that disseminated bornite. And I mean, I think hole 33 was where we first saw a big intercept of that style of mineralization. And oh, okay. Yeah. And I mean, that just got me so excited because it was entirely hosted within an intrusive lithology, whereas the best of our min, I think, to date, up, all the way up the west side with the systematic drilling was really hosted by the wall rocks to the intrusions. So you see that kind of thing, and all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, there's going to be a real volume of this very, very exciting mineralization. And when you see that these disseminations individually, they might be small. The disseminations are small as opposed to a big chunky bornite vein, but there's bornite all through this huge, huge volume. And those kinds of volumes are where you build the tons and ultimately the huge resources that you can get. I mean, a good analogy, I think, is the porphyry stock itself. It has a high magnetic signature, but individually that rock is not the most, a hand sample of that rock is not the most magnetic rock. It's all the disseminated magnetite throughout an intrusion that gives you that really high mag signature for a more oxidized intrusion. So it's the same thing with the disseminations. You put all those little spots of bornite together and you just get this very good grade and very, very large resource. So that's what got me excited. That's what got me out of bed. Actually, I usually rise pretty early, Rob. But anyway.
I was kidding.
Yeah, I know you were.
The word bornite to me means high grade copper. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but when
No.
you're talking about these volumes bornite, I'm just like, wow, like that's exciting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, bornite carries more copper per volume than chalcopyrite, and chalcocite carries even more. Higher. It's higher tenor, really. That mineral is the term they use. So yeah, it's exciting. And if you're in the Golden Triangle, bornite, runs with gold. So let's cross our fingers that all that stuff is
Ah,
heading
in
to
the
gold too.
golden triangle, it runs with gold.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I
Mhm.
learned something new today. Thank you for having
Yeah,
me do this.
yeah, Red Chris is a great example there. Where you have the bornite, it's great. And that's when we were drilling GT Gold. We never really saw bornite, but we were always hinting that we're getting down toward the bornite zone. I don't think we ever did, and maybe they will now, but yeah, exciting.
So Tony, it's interesting because it seems to me that there's a segment of investors who don't really understand NAC, and I'm not sure why. It's just maybe they need more time. Maybe they just need to see some really high grades to blow them away. But it's kind of interesting that there's a segment of investors who don't seem to get it. Uh, what can you do to help them to see the opportunity here?
More stuff like this, just educating, me doing the high level marketing and investment information, pairing with Neil and Charlie, giving more of the technical stuff, doing the stuff that we do with Nate Smith, where it kind of combines everything and then, reshares it with his followers. Shout out to Nate Smith and Baron. Just more or less the same. Look, we came from 3 cents. So when people look at our stock, I think a lot of people, most investors, probably including me, if I was investing, wouldn't be able to tell a difference between a good property or not. That you follow volume, and then you look at where the stock came from. It's a 15x. You missed the boat. What we're trying to tell people is look at the comps. Forget where we came from. Does this have an opportunity to be a $500 million, $1 billion company? If we do, let's get a re-rate, and then all of a sudden, there is a potential for a 10x. And from the big guys, the funds that have the geos, there really is no analogy for this property. There's nothing else like it. At least outside of the Golden Triangle. So it's hard to really compare it when you're working with it in the model. But if we start to hit in 35 and 38, which I'm cautiously optimistic that we can, then I think a lot of these funds will see what we put out and they'll just have fat fingers and put the buy signal and figure it out later. But I think a lot of investors, including companies, they'd rather invest in you when you're further de-risked at $2 than when you're not de-risked at 50 cents. So there's a lot more room to come. We have a lot more information to share, but that's kind of diving into the minds that I think a lot of these investors are. Most investors that invest in stock, for the most part, that are trading are probably own between 5 and 10,000 shares. Our big investors that own millions of shares, they're holding on to their shares. So that's kind of the difference right now. We're seeing some volume though. So we saw about 1.5 million volume yesterday, 1.35 million today so far. That means there's more people buying into the stock. I saw someone pick up 500,000 shares in one house today. So people are starting to get it. And, eventually there won't be any stock for sale. And, why stock goes up, people always ask me. More people are buying than selling. So we're hoping to get to that point. But again, it's going to depend on the assays. It's a risk both ways, but, just watch out.
The word gold is in the company name, but it's not really a gold company. I think most investors do understand that copper is the main driver here at NAC. Gold is a very nice, second metal. But it's interesting to see the gold and silver stocks run as hard as they have the last couple of weeks. And, American Eagle is just sort of sideways, which is fine. But the copper price is also down 4 weeks in a row. So even though gold and silver have run, copper has not gone anywhere. So I think people should be cognizant of that. And I think it's fantastic to have both copper and gold, in the same project. It's a 1-2 punch. And I think, frankly, there's more upside in the near term or in the next 12 months in copper than gold. Gold has already run quite a bit. Neil, I want to ask you about the assays. Have you sent off all the core to the lab? What's the timing that you think of the turnaround from the lab?
It's been a little bit irregular. Like at the beginning of the season, it was great. We were like 2.5 week to 3 week turnaround from dropping it off at the freight depot to actually getting results back. And then it had slowed down to 8 weeks plus as of late. It does look like everything has been received by the lab, but there's still about 30 batches that need to be prepped still. But they're trickling in. So yeah, it's tough to say. This time of year, it can either take a long time or we can just get a bunch of clusters of batches all back at once. So I don't want to make any promises one way or the other for sure.
So to make a long story short, the assays will be out when they're out. But Neil, back me up here. We waited so long for those assays. How long were we waiting for 28? Like 4 weeks? We're just sitting there?
Yeah. Oh, and the way it works is, these labs get, if you've ever looked outside the loading bay of a lab, you'll see just apple crates and super sacks and pallets of rice bags. And we had everything except for a batch in the middle of the hole back, and we were waiting for an extra 2 weeks just for that one batch to get to it, just from presumably its position when it was unloaded at the lab. So there's a lot of factors at play.
Yeah, so we'll get the assays when we get them, hopefully sooner than later. And all good mining investors know that good news travels fast. I want to ask you about the blue sky in this project. Some of the criticisms, which we have to field those, are that you guys have stayed in one area and you should be drilling more. You should be doing more. You should be stepping out across the donut. What do you think the plan will be in the future? Will you be more aggressive in testing to the east, further to the south, to the north?
Well, first of all, before we get into that, I want to say what my mama used to tell me. It's always easy to spend other people's money, okay? So I think Charlie can jump out. You want to stay where there's mineralization and you slowly move out. And this is a big friggin' zone that we're on right now. So we will get to that whole donut, but we got to spend our money wisely because each meter we drill is about $400 all in. So I'll hit that first, but go ahead, Neil.
Well, yeah, it's a lot easier to commit to a bunch of bold step outs when you have the resources to do the follow-up. And if you step out a long ways and you miss, it makes it harder to justify with a smaller budget to do another close by hole. And if we go by what we know at NAC, like hole 3 and hole 5, if hole 5 was a big step out hole, for example, it might have been pretty hard to justify stepping out 100 meters from that and hitting what we hit. So we need to make sure that there is enough money to ensure that we can do it systematically. I think that's really, really important. Also, we're here on a bit of a, no matter where you're drilling, you're here on a bit of a social license, right? We work pretty closely with LBN and we're pretty respectful of the land. And coming in and doing a bunch of heli holes and just making a bunch of clearings in otherwise pretty nice forest without the real justification for it, just in a like wildcatting essentially. It's not a great look, and it makes it harder to maintain those relationships, and it puts your reclamation obligations a lot higher. So I think we can explore this efficiently from a capital standpoint, and also socially from an environmental standpoint, which we're trying to do. So if we step out, work from the known logged areas, work within exploration trail, and build out from trails we've built, so that we don't have to continue to push trails into other areas. And, I don't think we're compromising too much in that respect. I think we can still have a really effective program while keeping all of this other stuff in mind.
If we went to do a big step, let's say, hey, at the end of the season after hole 32, we're like, you know what, guys? Let's just put our last 4 holes all around the ring there. We could have missed, and then we probably wouldn't have hit 33, 35, and 38. So sometimes when you stick by the plan, things work out. And people look at the surface drilling even before we're there, the 19,000 meters, it looks like it's been blitzed. But if you look at it underground, it's all empty, under 200 meters, and nothing there has even been drilled. So, in essence, we're drilling a lot of undrilled areas. With every drill hole, we're drilling in the north. So we are kind of really stepping out a lot. And because we're drilling so many long holes, if you look at it from a plan view map, it looks like it's a small property, but looking north to south, it's over 1.2 kilometers, east to west, over 350 meters, and growing. And Belgrano was like a little pea on our property, and that thing mined for 30 years. So you don't need a whole big property. And everyone talks about jurisdiction style. Jurisdiction style properties are for exploration companies that don't know where to drill and don't have a potential deposit yet. We're lucky we have NAC is 25 square kilometers. And the heat is right in the center of our property, and it allows us to focus and actually find, hopefully, a deposit faster than everyone else. And guess what? If it becomes a mine someday, those surface rights, it doesn't matter if you have mineral rights nearby, we can expand our property on there. And I'm sure our next door neighbors, they'll eventually become a golf course for us. I'm very confident in that.
Yeah, I think that's important color from both of you, that a lot of investors who are at home and lack some important context tend to make judgments that are not fully informed. And the company is contemplating many factors, and they're often doing what's best for shareholders, because at the end of the day, they have a lot at stake too, and they want to get this right, and they want to make sure that the people in the area are happy as well with the work being done at the project. So yeah, thank you for that context. So I'll give you each the closing words. What haven't I asked? What should we know?
Why don't I lead that one off, Rob?
Okay.
You mentioned, what can you do for investors to try and get them more interested in the project and to believe in it a bit more. And I would say we do what we did with you when we brought you out there, and just to see the area and to recognize that this is a place where you could actually build a mine. The topography is favorable, the access is good, it's largely in a clear cut, and it's just, almost perfect. You've got the support of the locals, and you want to keep that on side. But yeah, it's a very good setup up there.
Thank you. Neil, Tony, final words?
Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say. I think that was pretty comprehensive. No, I'll just again give another shout out to the team we had on site. We're pretty pleased with the results so far and looking forward to what's going to come out, and couldn't have done it without the hard work of a whole crew of geos and core cutters and geotechs and camp staff and drillers. So yeah, no, it's been great.
So the assays are pending for 10 holes?
10 holes.
10 holes. Okay. Pending assays. Pending assays. The story of our lives. Tony?
I'll finish though. We don't just have one high grade area, I think. We have two for sure. We have a big envelope of scale. So we got high grade, we got scale. You can drive a golf cart right on your property next to a glacier or in a jungle, which really does make a difference when you're building a mine and you're exploring a mine. And we've explored probably 20% of our property. So we have a lot of blue sky. We're going to keep on building out around that donut, and we're going to let the guy, Charlie, Greig, and Neil Prowse, who are part of the GT Gold discovery and amongst others, help steward this ship and get us to the promised land. But, we've delivered in the last 2 years. We brought the stock from 3 cents, it's 55 cents. We made a discovery, stick by us. We'll give you information and we'll look after your money. And, the whole point of the game is create shareholder value, which is what we plan to do. So again, stock ticker is AE. Tree falls
and gold is found with Bornite in the Golden Triangle. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is a great conversation. I learned a few things, and I look forward to those assays. Cheers.
Contact us anytime.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks,
Thank
Rob.
you.
Thanks.